Hey everybody, good morning. It's a nice cool 37 degrees Fahrenheit this morning here on my timber trail, and I'm getting ready to drop a pine tree that'll be used to make some porch flooring on my sawmill. And I want to do a video about this process today. A lot of work, a lot of time goes into felling a tree and getting it to the sawmill, and I thought it'd be good to step through the process and show everything that's involved. So stick around, we'll get the camera flipped and start talking about a bunch of different stuff. Okay, so the tree I want to drop today is right there dead center in the camera view down at the end of the timber trail. This is basically how I'm creating this trail. I'm just working my way in a certain direction and harvesting the trees that I want to use for the sawmill. Eventually I'll have side trails come off of this, but for now I'm just kind of establishing the main trail. So that tree is going to be a good size for the project I have in mind. And one of the first things I like to do with any of these trees is, scope out the height. I've already measured around the base and at shoulder height, just to get an idea how much lumber I can get out of that tree. But I want to just estimate the height right now, and to do that I'm going to use a app called Theodolite on my iPhone. And so I'm going to switch over to record the screen and talk through that process so you can see how I'm going to measure the height of that tree. Okay, so here we are in the Theodolite app, and I'll put a link to this app down below. And what I'm going to use is a feature inside the app known as the AB calculator. And I'm going to shoot an angle or an elevation to the bottom of the tree and then the top of the tree, and I'm going to record those 2 points. And I showed in a previous video how you can just eyeball angles to know how far a tree is going to fall when you cut it. In this case, I really want to know the height of the tree, so this is a little bit more of a detailed measurement, but the app makes it quite simple. So my first thing I'm going to do is aim at the bottom of the tree, and I'm going to record that in the app as point A. So that's going to measure the elevation angle from where I'm holding the iPhone down to the bottom of that tree. Then I'm going to aim up at the very top of that tree and record that as point B. And at that point the date is taken, so I can kind of relax. I'm going to go over here and choose calculate, and I'm going to ask it to tell me the distance and height. So distance to the tree and height of the tree from those elevations. And to do that, it's going to use as the reference length the height I was holding the iPhone at. And I was holding it at about mid-face level. So for me, that's about, I guess that'll be about 5.5 feet. So I'm going to put in 5.5. And so it's come back and calculated for me and told me that the distance from where I'm standing to the tree is a little bit over 46 feet. And then the height of that tree is 58.5 feet. So that's real good information to have. You could actually, I went to the top of the tree, but you could actually go to, midway up the tree where like you feel like you want to buck logs for lumber, because the very top of the tree is skinny with limbs. You're not going to use all that for lumber, but you could measure this height anywhere to get an idea how much wood you're going to get out of the tree. But really, I just want to know the overall height, because I already have an idea how much of that will be used for lumber. So there's that calculation. We can close this out. We can actually, if we push copy and close, it'll copy those numbers into the clipboard in the iPhone, or you could paste it into your notes, into a spreadsheet. You could do all kinds of other things with the number, but I'm just going to close that out. And so that's a quick way that we estimated height of that tree. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the tools I use when I'm out here felling trees. The first one, the big one, is over there on the right. That's a cant hook, sometimes known as a PV, and there's all different variations of those with different types of tips. That one is made by a company up in Maine in the USA, PV Manufacturing. That's the original company that started making all those logging tools, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago. They've been around for a long time. They make great tools. Prices are very reasonable. They have nice hardwood handles. So if you need any sort of logging tools, I recommend you check them out. I don't have any affiliation with them, of course, but I've just gotten several of their tools over the years. They're just good old-fashioned American-made tools. So that's a cant hook that's used a lot. Then I've got my chainsaw, and I actually have about, I don't know, 6 or 8 chainsaws. I lose track of all the saws. This is the one I tend to use the most. It's a Husqvarna 562 XP. That's one of their professional saws. The pro saws, they tend to be a little bit lighter and more powerful. That's true across any brand, and they will last longer. They're much more rebuildable, so I pretty much only buy pro saws now. I have a bigger saw, a Steel 461. That's a really powerful big saw that I can use with my Alaskan rig for milling lumber, and I rarely break that saw out for felling trees unless they're gigantic and I need to run a really long bar, because that's a very heavy saw. But this 562, it's 60 cc. It's just a really ideal combination of power and weight and size, and I just tend to gravitated towards this saw for almost everything I do in the last couple of years. I've got smaller saws, I've got top handle saws, I've got climbing saws, but this one gets the most use, so that's what I'll be using today. I always carry my toolbox with me, and I've got a bunch of different types of tools you'd use for working on chainsaws, and some notebooks in there with felling techniques. I've got my file set over here. I'll be breaking that out shortly, and we'll talk about how to sharpen a chain. I always wear my chainsaw chaps. They're shown over there. Those are, God, they're probably 10, 15 years old. Those are by Labonville. They're full wrap chaps. Every once in a while I'll not wear those because I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to do something quick, and I will vividly remember why it's important to wear those. So those are good to have for protection. If I'm just doing groundwork, chances are I'm going to be using these 3M earmuffs for hearing protection. If I'm doing any sort of other work that requires a helmet, I'll handle that a couple different ways. I've got this steel forestry helmet with built-in hearing protection and a face shield, and this is real handy. This is real handy for groundwork if I'm, trimming stuff down near ground level, or say up to shoulder height. It's just good. It protects me from brush, and it's comfortable to wear. But I find this a little bit cumbersome if I'm felling a tall tree and I need to be looking up a lot. This is just kind of too clunky for that. So for really tall trees, which I'll be doing today, I tend to use this regular forestry helmet. This is an old-fashioned aluminum one. You can get these in fiberglass. It's very similar to a mining helmet, but forestry, where you're not working around electricity, they tend to use aluminum because it's just nice and light. And with this helmet, I'll use just regular old earplugs for hearing protection. And again, I found over the years, this is good insurance to have. I mean, in a very catastrophic event, it could really save your life. But I've had limbs fall. I've had things clock me in the head or in the face that I wasn't expecting, and the helmet really does a good job, kind of protecting you even from light stuff that wouldn't kill you. Let's see, what else do I got here? So I've got an axe in here. That's mainly used for driving in wedges for final felling of a tree, and I'll probably be using that today. I also carry a small hatchet on my belt. This comes in handy in so many situations, from something as simple as whacking limbs and branches out of the way quickly, or if I just need to quickly adjust a felling wedge in a tree, that'll always be at my hip and ready to go. So those are good to have. I got my gas and my oil, and then I guess the last tool, put it down over here, is my Spencer tape. And they've got these with different types of scales, but this one is just a straight linear scale, and I will use this to measure out the length of logs when I am bucking a tree. into shorter pieces, you know, to get to the sawmill. And hopefully you'll see this later in the video, but I'll attach this to the butt of the tree. It's called a Bailey nail. It's kind of just a bent horseshoe tack, I believe. Attach that to the butt end of the tree, and then you can basically walk down along the tree with your saw, streaming out this tape behind you. While you're walking down the tree, you can limb it, and you know, go all the way up the tree, or as long as your tape will allow, limbing the tree. And then you can walk back down and read off measurements with this tape that's stretched out along the entire tree, and buck the tree into logs at, you know, predetermined lengths. A lot of times what I'll do is either use my hatchet or a screwdriver to just scratch length marks on the tree based on what the tape measures tell me, or you can just eyeball it and cut directly. But this is a real handy tool to have for a logger. You can clip that on your belt. It's just it's a simple tape measure, but it's highly specialized for logging use, and it comes in handy. So now I want to sharpen my chain. When I'm doing a lot of cutting, I might sharpen the chain 3 or 4 times a day. It's very important to be able to do this. I know some people just change out chains, but if you're trying to get stuff done and you want to be productive, you really should know how to quickly field sharpen a chain with a file. So I'm going to work on that right now real quick, and I'll set up the camera so we have a better view of that, so you can see how I do it. But you know, the nice thing about chainsaws is that once the chain starts getting dull, it'll send out signals. It'll be very clear to you. When you're cutting across a log, that chain should be shooting out chips that are like confetti, small, light, little squares. And those come from the chisel action of the cutters peeling off the wood. And so when the chain is sharp and the cutting is good and efficient, you know, you're going to be throwing confetti, and you know, everything is good. As soon as you see that confetti taper off and maybe start to turn into a little bit of dust, that's your first clue that the chain needs to be sharpened. If you get to the point where you're cutting and it's only dust, you're well past the point of sharpening. In fact, you may have already done damage to your cutters because they will have heated up. That makes them brittle, and that means you can't really sharpen them as effectively. So you want to always keep an eye on that, the chips coming out of that saw on the chain. Once they stop looking like pure confetti, you know, take a break and sharpen your chain. So let me get this camera set up a little bit better, and I'll go through the process I use to field sharpen chain on this saw. All right, so the first thing before I forget, make sure you're wearing gloves when you're doing this. So you're going to be working around sharp cutters, and you know, gloves are a must. Make sure they're good, heavy leather gloves. So a lot of times when I'm sharpening, I like to use a clamp to hold the bar or the saw in place. And they make different kinds of clamps. I've seen clamps you can hammer into a stump. You can certainly use an old vise on a workbench, but generally when I'm out in the field, I don't use any sort of clamp, just because I'm working fast, and it's not really needed. And you'll see how I kind of manage things that way. But if you do have a vise or some sort of a clamp, definitely use it. So I'm going to do two types of sharpening today, I think. What I'll do first is sharpen the cutters, and I've got a file guide. This is Steel brand, but Oregon, a bunch of other companies make these guides, and this just really helps you get a nice consistent cut from cutter to cutter. If for some reason you were filing a little bit differently, the saw is going to want to pull or curve in the cut, and so a guide is helpful to give you consistent filing along all your cutters. I know a lot of the old timers know how to do it totally freehand. My father does it freehand, but I really like having the guide, so I'll be doing that to sharpen the cutters. And then in my kit, there's basically a raker depth checker you can lay down after you've done your cutters to check and see if the rakers need to be taken down. I think they will be, but I'll let the guide, the depth gauge tell me. If that's the case, then I'll use the second file to file the rakers. The rakers are very important for determining how much wood the chain or the cutters are trying to peel off when they run through. That needs to be set pretty specifically. If you're not taking off enough wood, it's not going to make a good cut. If you're taking off too much, it'll be too aggressive and grabby and actually dangerous. So it's important to check your rakers and take them down if needed, and so we'll see if that's necessary. The first thing I like to do though is mark a tooth with a Sharpie, just so I have my starting point, and as I rotate around and go through everything, I'll know where I started and when to stop. And so this is a pretty standard 3/8 chain. I've got the right size file and guide for 3/8. There are different files and guides for different size chains, so make sure you're using the right one. But what I'm going to do is, starting with the tooth or the cutter that I marked, is I'm just going to press the bar down and hold it steady and line up the file with that cutter. And this guide has angle marks that you can use to eyeball how you're going to hold this, and that's important. You want to again try and stay consistent so that you get a nice even cut. And I'm just going to eyeball that angle and make a pass, and I can tell that this file needs to be rotated. It's a little bit dull, so let me do that. Once you use these files, periodically you'll need to replace them or just rotate them around so you've got fresh cutting. So let me try that again, line it up. Okay, so now I'm actually cutting, and so I'll move on to the next tooth and do it. And this chain was not super dull. I know it was cutting pretty good yesterday, so I'm only going to do a couple passes with the file. You might need to do as many as 3 or 4. You just want to kind of get an idea, what you need to take off to get the sharpness back. But generally, it's going to be 1 or 2. And I'll speed this up in a second because this is a very repetitive thing. You don't need to watch me go through all the 72 cutters here. Okay, and so now I'm back to my starting cutter. I don't need to do that one. Now it's time to cut the opposite set of cutters. And the easiest way to do that is just to flip everything around and repeat the process. This is a little bit more awkward. It's like switching lefty to righty for some people, but once you get the hang of it, it's not a big deal at all. So let me get going on that. And again, I'll start with the cutter that's right after my mark, and I'm gonna eyeball that. And again, I'll speed this up in the video once I get going, so you don't have to watch me march through all of these cutters, but it's really the same process. I'm doing 2 passes on each tooth. All right, now I'm back to my the cutter that I marked with the Sharpie. So that takes care of the other side, and we're basically done with that type of sharpening now. So at this point, I want to check the raker depth, and so I'll use this gauge, and this is real easy to use. You pretty much just want to bring it along, set it down on the cutters, and then look at the height of the raker compared to the height of the gauge. If the raker is sticking out above that gauge, then you need to take it down, and again, for that you'd use this other type of file. But I'm looking at this right now, and right there it's still good. I'll go down a ways and check. Still pretty good. That's still pretty good, and you can check it in the other direction if you want. Check it in a couple places, and all of these look really good, so I'm not going to bother taking down these rakers. It's just not necessary. But again, if you were doing this check, and the main reason you have to take the rakers down is when you file the cutter, you're basically lowering, even by a little bit, you're lowering the height of that cutting chisel, and so you're changing its height relative to the raker, and that's how the raker is controlling the depth of that cut. And so you know, I would say probably every 4 to 6 times I do a normal filing, I will have to adjust the rakers, but obviously I don't need to here. So those guys are good. So this chain is ready to go. And at this point, I guess I got a few little odds and ends to take care of before we can go tackle that tree, but I'll set up the camera for that next, and we'll get to it. All right, so we're almost ready to go here. I just want to go over some of the last few steps I take before cutting the tree. First thing, you know, check your work area. In this case, there's some vines I want to clear out. You don't want anything underfoot that could tangle you in case you need to make a quick escape or just to work around the tree. So that little holly, I'll nip that down and get that out of the way. I think that's a dead stick. Yeah, we'll just make sure this has a nice clear work area. Make sure there are escape routes off to the sides. Just because trees can be very unpredictable, you know, even in the best of situations with the best prep and planning, unpredictable things happen. So you always want to have a clear work area and a clear escape route. I've got my saw over there that's been warming up. I always like to make sure the saw's been started and warmed up before I do any cutting. It's got full gas and oil. You don't want to have to take a break in the middle of a cut because you ran out of gas or oil. My axe is over there ready to use felling wedges. And I did a video, oh gosh, maybe 6-8 months ago, and I'll link that below, where I talked about a special cut I use for these tall, skinny pine trees. These, because they're so tall and have such a small canopy, they really don't obey a normal notch and back cut. They just may not want to fall in the direction of the notch or the face cut. So I'm going to use a special cut where I put a standard notch or face cut in the front, then I'll plunge through out the back of the tree to make a slot. Tap a wedge in there, have that ready, and then I'll come and do 2 back cuts on each side of the wedge. That'll leave a hinge and a small section of holding wood that should pop when I tap that wedge, driving in home with the axe. And so that's the cut I'm going to be using today. In the rare event that doesn't work, I do have ropes and pulleys ready in case I need to yank this over with my tractor. But that's I used to plan on that all the time, but since I started using that special cut, I rarely need to break out the ropes anymore. But I've got that stuff ready to go just in case, so that I can pull the tree down with the tractor somewhere far away, you know, in a safe position. So that's pretty much it for right here. I got a pretty nice open lane I'm going to be dropping the tree into. That's not always the case, but I have one here. There's I don't know if you can see, there's some thin wispy maples dangling over. Normally you want to get stuff like that out of the way, because as the tree comes down and hits that, it could kind of catapult it back at you. We call that throwback, and that can be very dangerous. But that stuff is so small, and it's mostly twiggy type stuff. I'm not really worried about that today. The only other thing of concern, you can maybe see there's an oak tree. It's a red oak. It's kind of lean. It's a little crooked. I really would like to leave that tree alone, give it a chance to grow. Part of this work I'm doing is thinning out the pines and trying to promote a healthier forest, and that's probably a 15 to 20 year old red oak that's I mean, it's a little crooked, but it's really a nice tree. So if I can avoid damaging that tree, I would like to. And so instead of felling straight down the middle of this lane, I'm going to probably bias it off to the left a little bit if I can. And I'll do that, you know, aiming the cut with the aiming marks on the saw right there. You can use that to direct your cut. Basically, it just dictates the direction the hinge is going to work in. And so I'm going to do my best to avoid that oak tree if I can. We'll see how good I do at the end. There's no wind today. It's a nice calm day. So it's going to come down to how well I can aim the cut, and then what kind of bias is happening at the top of the tree in terms of the canopy and the weight, and whether that causes it to twist or turn as it comes off the stump. But I will do my best to save that little oak down there, because that's a nice tree. So I am going to set up the camera now, get ready, and keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully this goes all according to plan. All right, there's our tree. It's down. Did fight a little bit, but I got it down and was able to get it bucked up into some nice sections. It did have a crook partway up about in this section, so it took a little bit longer than usual to read things and to make my cuts, but I did get 3 8-footers and 2 16-footers out of this, and so it worked out okay. It's interesting, when this tree hit the ground, I remember earlier I said I was trying to not disturb this oak tree over here. Well, when this pine tree hit the ground, the top cracked off and flipped up and actually went on the other side of that oak tree. So luckily it didn't hurt the tree, but it's just a good example of how unpredictable these things can be. Even when they hit the ground, they can do something very unexpected. So, you know, the tree came down here, the top ended up over there. It's just the way it happens sometimes. But anyways, this guy's down. I think I'm going to cut one more tree today. Probably take this guy just to give me a good stockpile. I really like to get all my felling done one day and then skidding the next day, and then sawing, you know, in the weeks after that. It's just easier equipment wise to knock things out in pieces instead of mixing everything up. So I'm going to take a lunch break now, but I'll be felling this guy next in that direction into the camera. There should be plenty of room for that, and I'll buck him up and get those logs over to the sawmill in the next couple days. I've already done a video about how I skid logs out, and I'll put a link to that below just so you can see. I mean, that's a bit of a process, but I've got a good system for that. So I think that's going to be it for today. As usual, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.